Good morning. Welcome to First Edition, the online ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles, and I'm the senior minister here in this amazing congregation, and we're thrilled that you joined us on this day. We want you to know, no matter who you are, what you believe or don't believe, you are welcomed and accepted here, just as you are. Right now, there's a QR code on the screen. We'd love for you to capture that with your phone. Click on the link that pops up, and you can register your attendance, share a prayer concern, even give to the offering if you choose to do so. We would love to hear from you. Today, I'm beginning a new sermon series titled, What We Talk About When We Talk About God. It's about how God is invested not only in the universe, the cosmos, but in your life and mine. Let's go together to worship now. The truth is, we have a problem with God. Those are the words of Rob Bell near the beginning of his book, What We Talk About When We Talk About God, the inspiration for this two-part sermon series. The truth is, we have a problem with God. Rob was a pastor for many, many years, and he saw many members of his congregation leading desiring lives filled with meaning, lives that matter, lives that make a difference, not just in their families and their neighborhood, but in the world. And oftentimes they ran into a barrier named God. Now, what Rob discovered, maybe what you're already intuiting, is that really it wasn't God who was the problem. It was our culture's view of who God is. On the one hand, our culture seems to see God. There are some who see God as kind of a bully in the sky who has thunderbolts in his hand. And if you do something wrong, boy, you better be careful, because there's going to be a bolt coming your way out of anger and out of judgment, and you'll be punished. Or there's another view. It's far away from that one, but just as weak and unhelpful, where God is nothing more than a mascot. You know, mascots, they have those overly large heads. They don't speak. They don't necessarily do anything helpful. They're on the sidelines at a football game or a basketball game, and they dance around and they entertain the crowd. But okay, now the serious part of the game is back. Get off the court. You've entertained us. Get out of the way. Those gods don't help us. What we need is a genuine encounter with the God of the universe. The God who is and was and will be. Rob reminds us in his book of the story found early on the pages of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, about a man named Jacob. Jacob was anything but a spiritual person. He was a scoundrel. He always seemed to go from trouble to trouble to trouble. He was on his way from one place to another. When he stopped to rest for the night, found a stone nearby, made it into a pillow. And then this scoundrel named Jacob, he had a dream. Have you heard of his dream before? He dreamed of this ladder that reached all the way to heaven and came all the way down to earth, right where he was sleeping. And on this ladder, there were angels who were ascending to heaven and angels who were descending to earth. Throughout the dream, going up and going down. When he woke the next morning, he said, God was in this place, and I did not know it. Do you hear the power of that statement? He wasn't looking for a spiritual experience. He wasn't trying to be religious. God came to him, and God was in that place. What Jacob was trying to tell us, what the author of the book of Genesis was trying to tell us, what Rob wants us to see, is that there is nowhere that God is not. There is nowhere we can go where the presence of God is not there as well. The grace of God embraces all of us. And not just us, followers of Jesus, but when I say all of us, I mean all of us in the world. That grace of God is given, and it covers the world and everything in it. Every creature of God's is blessed by that same grace. Remember what the book of Revelation says, in the end of all ends, all things will be made new. It's a promise that we are already in the grace of God. I know you might be skeptical. I can be skeptical at times myself, especially when little irritating things happen to me. A couple of weeks ago, I was on retreat with three of my best friends in ministry. We were at St. John's Abbey, about an hour and a half north of Minneapolis. A beautiful spot there where the Benedictine monks have constructed this abbey and this monastery. We got to spend some time with the monks to see how they combine both their work of the day and their scriptural work and how they overlap and intersect with each other. Interviewed several of them, spent some time with them in their midday prayers. On the second day we were there, one of the other pastors, a friend of mine named John Ross, some of you remember John, he was a pastor here for a number of years. He and I wanted to get some exercise in before dinner, and so we went for a hike around this beautiful lake. I mean, this beautiful lake where the Abbey is located, where the little college next door is located. In fact, I noticed driving around in Minnesota, every city, every town, everywhere, there are beautiful, gorgeous lakes throughout the whole state. It's an amazing place. Well, it was about 55 degrees like today, blue sky, light breeze, perfect day for a walk. We took off at a good pace, but we got about 200 yards when all of a sudden, we walked into this black cloud. Have you ever been to Minnesota? This black cloud of these tiny little bugs called midges. It was horrible. It was awful. They are basically tiny demons from hell.
Have you encountered these things? They were in my nose, they were in my mouth. I mean, I didn't need to eat any dinner that night. I had more than enough protein. It was disgusting. I was like, John, what is this? And the more I tried to wave them away from my face, the more recruits came in to help the ones that had. It was not fun. Eventually, the breeze came up, and it kind of blew the midges away, and we had an enjoyable walk. But afterwards, as we got back, I was just like, why in the world did God create these bugs? There's nothing good about them. They can't possibly be in the grace of God. Can't be covered by the grace of God. What's the point of this? I asked God directly that question. That's what I heard. Silence. Although I kind of decided later, well, maybe God created these bugs just to watch us crazy humans get irritated by these tiny little things that were so much more powerful than. And I know there are serious reasons to be skeptics about the presence of God. I know. I've talked with many of you. Out of nowhere, there's a death. A divorce comes that you never saw. A disease raises its head in your house. And it's just too much. Where is God? But what Jacob and Rob, and we're going to hear from Paul and from Jesus later in a few minutes, what they want us to see is that even in those hellish moments, God is present. Because there's nowhere that God is not. One of my favorite sermons was written by a great Lutheran pastor who declared in that sermon, if you fall into hell, you will land in the hand of God. I believe that. I trust that with all my heart. That even in hell, we can experience God's presence with us. So I'm kind of wondering on this day, have you ever had a moment like Jacob's? Have you had a moment where you weren't necessarily looking for something spiritual, but out of nowhere, you sensed the presence of God, or maybe you didn't call it God, maybe it was just an overwhelming feeling of peace or joy or love. I heard a grandparent say to me once, there was something that happened on Christmas afternoon. The presents were open, the meal had been eaten, no one got into a fight. Everything was beautiful. The children, the grandchildren were down on the floor enjoying the new things they'd received for Christmas. And I just looked up and it looked like heaven. Have you had a moment like that? My friend Ron is a Presbyterian pastor. He got a business degree in college, got a good job in a business coming out of school, was making quite a bit of money for somebody in his mid-20s, was thinking about going on to get an MBA eventually and really expand his skills. But there was this little nudge that just kind of, maybe it was like one of those little midges, just kind of irritated him in the back, the back of his mind. He sensed that God was calling him into ministry. And he kind of pushed it aside and pushed it away and talked to his wife a little bit, but that's not something I want to do. And then one day when he was at work, wasn't praying, was reading his Bible, he said his office was just filled with this warm glow. Not bright lights like these TV lights up here, but this warm glow that just enveloped him and everything else. And when he told me the story, he said, Glenn, I believe I was in the presence of God. And that's when I accepted my call. Now, again, you might be skeptical of something like that, but if you ever heard Ron telling this story, he is a sweet, genuinely humble person. And I'm almost certain you'd believe that's what he experienced as well. If we open our eyes, our hearts, our minds, our hands, maybe we'll find that God is just as close as our next breath. There are some Hebrew Bible scholars who say that, that the word Yahweh, which is a name for God, maybe even is the sound of breathing in, Yahweh. And every time you take a breath, you're saying God's name. And there, God was in that place, and you did not know it. The Apostle Paul, who we've heard from earlier in the reading today, before he became the apostle, was known as someone named Saul, and he was a persecutor of Christians. He was a very strict theologian, and as far as he was concerned, these Christian folks starting these churches were way outside of the bounds of proper theology, and he began to attack them in and around Jerusalem. He was a brutal person. Now he's on his way, in this particular story that comes earlier in Acts, he's on his way to Damascus. This man named Saul, who will later be Paul, he's on his way to Damascus, north of Jerusalem, well north of Jerusalem, to persecute the Christians who are there, when all of a sudden this thunderous voice comes out of nowhere, knocks Paul down on his backside. It's the voice of Jesus saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" It was an overwhelming moment. He's temporarily blinded. And yet for him, it was the presence of God. Sometimes spiritual moments come like that, don't they? A metaphorical meteor comes out of the sky and knocks us down, throws us on our back. You've not done anything wrong. It's not your own fault. It's just life happens, things happen. And the next thing you know, you recognize, oh, even here, flat on my back, there's the presence of God. Well, Saul, who changes his name to Paul, is transformed. He begins to see that God's grace expands well beyond his theological understandings of who God is and how God is. And he begins to preach all around the cities of the Mediterranean of this Jesus whose love is given to the world in the name of God, who loves everyone. There's nowhere you can go to get outside of the grace of God. In fact, this Paul will write one day to the church in Rome and tell them there is nothing you can do to be separated from the love of God in Christ Jesus. There's nothing at all that will separate you, neither life, nor death, nor powers, nor persecutions, nor evil, nor anything else under all creation will separate you from the love of God. Oh, he's preaching like that all around the Mediterranean when, as we heard today, he makes his way to Athens. Now, this is a difficult thing for Paul. He's a strict monotheist. As much as his theology is broadening and he's beginning to see God's grace given everywhere, when he gets to Athens, there are idols to dozens and dozens of gods with all these different names, the god of this, the god of that, and the god of the other thing. And he's overwhelmed. You can just feel it in between the lines, the story being told there, until he sees an idol inscribed to an unknown God. And he recognizes, that's my angle in. That's where I can start. That's where I can share with them the love of God as seen in Christ Jesus. So he goes to the Areopagus. The Areopagus, for hundreds of years before Paul, was a place where Greek poets and philosophers and legal experts and other intellectuals would gather to listen and learn from each other, argue with each other, present court cases, that sort of thing. It's sort of the center for the academic and intellectual community of Athens. It was for hundreds of years. And how did he begin his sermon? Did you hear how he began it? How he began? Athenians, I see how very spiritual you are. He didn't come with judgment. He didn't come with condemnation. He didn't come to deride their faith and tell them why all these gods were kind of silly. Not at all. Not at all. Instead, he began with an open and inclusive word. I see how spiritual you are. And I'm reading between the lines here. But I even wonder if in that moment, Paul didn't have another spiritual experience where his understanding of God's grace began to expand even more. Oh, he'll get into a lecture here about Jesus. We'll look at that a little more carefully next week. But I wonder if Paul didn't begin to see, oh, God is in this place. And I did not know it. Maybe God shows up in places we never expect unless we open our hearts and minds. Rob Bell, in his book, tells a story about a woman who was fighting cancer. She's in a hospital. She's been there for many, many, many days. This particular night, she's about to fall asleep, but she's overwhelmed with fear, worry, anxiety. She doesn't think she's going to survive. The cancer is killing her. The cure feels like it's killing her as well. She can barely fall asleep. Finally, she does. And then a couple of hours later, the night nurse comes in. You know, if you've ever spent the night in a hospital, you know that about every 2 hours, a nurse will come in and check your vitals and see how your heart rate is going, all that sort of thing. They might poke you and prod you a little bit, make sure that if you're on an IV, that it's still dripping, and it's impossible to sleep to that visit. Well, this particular nurse, this night nurse, was unbelievably kind, calm, and gracious. The woman who was there for the cancer treatment was really caught up in how sweet and precious this night nurse was. The way she spoke to her, the gentleness of her voice. She came in again 2 hours later and again 2 hours later. And after that third visit, the woman fell into a deep sleep, the best sleep she'd had in weeks. She woke the next morning when the morning nurse came in, feeling courage, feeling hope, feeling like I can get through this. I can make my way through it. I'm going to survive. And she described to the morning nurse what she'd experienced with this night nurse and gave her a very detailed description of what the nurse looked like. And the morning nurse said, there's no one on this floor that looks like that. There's no one on this floor who comes anywhere close to what you described. I can guarantee you there was no one last night who looked like that. And what do you make of that? Do some of you say, oh, clearly this was an angel. It's a miracle. Out of nowhere, this angel came in dressed in nurse's garb and cared for this woman and gave her peace. Or some of you might be saying, no, it's not an angel. Those are mythological characters. It was just a substitute that nobody knew about. And that's all it was. It was just a coincidence, but still it was a nice thing. Well, sometimes I kind of find myself torn between those two poles. Was it a miraculous visit from heaven, or was it just somebody being kind and gracious? And sometimes it does. Sometimes these things happen to us, and it really is just a matter of a coincidence of two things intersecting each other. I remember when we were in Tennessee, we went there to go to seminary. Been there about 3 weeks or so. When Julie sat down with me over a peanut butter sandwich on a Saturday afternoon and said, chew your sandwich slowly. We're down to this much bread and that jar of peanut butter and just a little bit of milk. Neither one of us had a job. Well, Julie had a job, but she hadn't been paid yet. I was still looking for a job. We'd come with some money, but the money was getting tighter and tighter and tighter. She said, honestly, we're going to probably have to eat peanut butter for the next 4 or 5 days until I get my next paycheck. Well, okay, fine. I like peanut butter. We'll make it. The next morning we got up, and we lived not too far from this little fundamentalist church where they sang beautiful hymns and were really gracious and welcoming. The preaching was more about how to love each other than it was fire and damnation and that kind of stuff. And so we liked going to church there. We liked experiencing the Tennessee culture in that little congregation. And after our third Sunday, that third day, they figured out that I was a seminarian. And they were very kind to me outside as we walked out to the car, and they shook our hands and said, God bless you in your work. Then we got home, and I realized it was time to walk our little dog, Sally. I ate a peanut butter sandwich, and then I took Sally, who was the most precious Cocker Spaniel you've ever seen, took her out the back door, walked around to the front. And right there on the porch, there were several brown bags filled with bread and milk and fruit and vegetables. There was what looked like a freshly made homemade pie. It was amazing. It was like a miracle. No one knocked on the door. They just came out of nowhere. So I knocked on the door because it was locked, and Julie came. I said, look at this. It's a miracle. Can you believe it? Well, the next day I went to school, told the story to a couple people. One of the admins heard me talking about it, and she came out and said, those are my friends. I live near you guys. They figured out you were a seminarian, and they figured you're probably poor and probably needed food. Well, wonderful. Thank you. But let me ask you this. Is that any less of a miracle? Is that moment any less miraculous when kind strangers reach out to someone they've never met before, thinking maybe they need some food, and they deliver food? Is it any less a miracle when someone is kind to you, waves you through at an intersection, or pays for your coffee as you're lined up behind them, or welcomes you in as a stranger into their home? Is it any less a miracle when we treat each other in the way that Jesus wants us to treat the other? Is it any less miraculous? Are there not miracles everywhere if we open our eyes, our hearts, and our minds wide enough to see that they exist? Let's listen to Rob. He has some help for us here. You, me, love, quarks, sex, chocolate, the speed of light, it's all miraculous, and it always has been. You know they laughed at the 9 o'clock service with that quote. Makes me nervous if you don't chuckle just a little bit, but hear it again. You, me, love, quarks, sex, chocolate, the speed of light, it's all miraculous. And it always has been. Eventually, the Apostle Paul will get around to that point of view. It's what Jesus came to open our eyes to. All the miracles that Jesus does point us not to something supernatural, but to the love of God. Paul will say to the audience in Athens, your own poets, a poet from hundreds of years before Jesus, before the time of Christ, for we are all God's offspring. We are all his offspring. All God's offspring. Look around. One more point. Rob Bell, who told some of these stories today, loves to surf. He grew up in Michigan. He lives in California now. He loves to start every day that he can, early, sometimes before the sun is up, on a surfboard. He was out surfing one morning. The sun was just starting to peek over the top of the San Gabriel Mountains when he saw there was another surfer out there. They were the only two. They surfed for about an hour or so, kind of waving, staying out of each other's way, and the next thing you know, they ended up with their surfboards next to each other, just bobbing in the waves. A beautiful, perfect day. And the other surfer, a man, said, can I just tell you, I've been clean and sober now for a number of years. I used to be addicted to drugs, alcohol. My life was a mess. I didn't believe in God. Things were terrible. But when I got clean and sober in that process, God met me. He took a pause and a deep breath. He said, now, and he looked around, now I see God everywhere. Can we see with him? Can we see the miracle that we're sitting next to right now? Can you see the miracles in this space and in this room and in this world? Can we open our eyes wide enough, breathe deeply enough to recognize that even there, in your very next breath, there is God? Amen.
Thank you for joining us today for worship. I trust that you found the music inspiring and the message filled with hope. We're going to put that QR code back up on the screen. We'd love for you, if you haven't done so already, to take a moment to capture that code, click on the link, share with us a prayer concern if you have one, register your attendance, and then prayerfully consider making a donation to First Community Church. As you can imagine, it takes quite a bit of resources to share the love of Christ, not just here in Columbus, but literally around the world. We'd love for you to partner with us in this mission. In the meantime, I trust that you'll have a blessed and loved week.